St. Luke, the 12th chapter. Jesus said, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your hearts will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night, near dawn, and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. In one of Charles Schulz's Peanuts comic strips, Lucy is playing her usual position of right field, although over the years she was sometimes depicted in center or even left field, when suddenly a fly ball is hit out to her. Not moving an inch in any direction to get herself into position to make the catch, she just patiently stands there and waits for the ball to come to her. But rather than catching it, the ball lands behind her instead for a base hit. She walks over, picks up the ball, then saunters to the pitcher's mound to give it back to Charlie Brown. And she says to him, "Sorry, I missed that one, manager. I was hoping to catch it, but hope got in my eyes." Which then begs the obvious question, of course, what exactly is hope? As we heard in our second reading this morning, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, conviction of things not seen. So that's the question I'd like to explore with you a little bit this morning. What exactly is hope? Pastor Mike Foss once compared hope to wishful thinking and also to optimism as well. That's because we tend to get the three mixed up, don't we? Often thinking that they're pretty much the same thing, when in reality they aren't at all, at least not for a Christian, that is. The story of Lucy and her missed fly ball, says Foss, is appropriate because it reveals our human confusion over what hope really is. Lucy confuses hope with wishful thinking, he writes. Wishful thinking looks for that which has never happened before, Foss observes. Wishful thinking, he continues, anticipates that for which there has been no effort, no improvement. Mother was once taking her 4-year-old daughter to school when she was a doctor and left her stethoscope on the back seat of the car. And during the ride, the little girl picked it up and began to play with it. "Excellent," thought the doctor to herself as she glanced in the rearview mirror. My daughter wants to follow in my footsteps." Her excitement quickly turned to disappointment, however, when the child then brought the stethoscope up to her mouth and began to speak. "Hello, welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order?" I may have told this story before, but I couldn't resist. It's too good. Anyway, which do you think best describes what is at work here in this situation involving the doctor's first reaction upon seeing her daughter with the stethoscope? Hope or wishful thinking? For me, I'd have to go with wishful thinking. Not that there isn't a possibility that the daughter may indeed grow up to become a doctor, just like her mother. There most certainly is. But it's that for now, there just isn't any evidence to indicate or support the likelihood of this happening. For the time being, it's just a wish on the mother's part, isn't it? Like Foss, Eugene Peterson in his book, Living the Message, Daily Help for Living the God-Centered Life, points out that wishing and hoping, again, are not the same thing. Wishing, Peterson says, is something all of us do. It projects what we want or think we need into the future. And just because we wish for something good or holy, he then points out, we think it qualifies as hope. It does not, says Peterson. Wishing extends our egos into the future. Hope grows out of our faith. Hope is oriented toward what God is doing. Wishing is oriented toward what we are doing. A young mother once answered the phone. The voice on the other end said, "Honey, it's Mom. I called because I know that you're busy with the 3 children, and I want to give you some help. I'm going to stop by to clean the house, take care of the baby, and prepare dinner for when the boys get home from school. I want you to get ready to go to my beautician. I paid her already. She's going to give you the works. Your appointment is at 1 o'clock. Now go and give George a call at the office and tell him that you'll meet him at Shay J's for dinner. It's on me." At this point, however, the young mother suddenly interrupted and asked, "George? Who's George?" "Your husband," said the caller. "My husband's name is Fred," said the young mother. "Is this 555-3212?" asked the caller. "No, this is 555-2212. "Oh, I am so sorry. I have the wrong number," said the now embarrassed caller. And finally, after a long pause, the young mother sheepishly asked, "Does this mean you're not coming over?" Hope or wishful thinking? Once again, I'd have to say wishful thinking. What about you? Eugene Peterson then goes on to say that we can picture wishing as though it was a line coming out from us with an arrow at the end pointing into the future, pointing toward the thing that we most want to possess. Hope, however, is just the opposite, he says. It's a line that comes out of the future from God, which is pointing toward us. Hope, says Peterson, means being surprised because we don't know what is best for us or how our lives are going to be completed. To cultivate hope, he writes, is to suppress wishing, to refuse to fantasize about what we want, but to live in anticipation of what God is going to do next. And then you have optimism. According to the dictionary, optimism is a mental attitude reflecting a belief that the outcome of some specific endeavor or outcomes in general will be positive, favorable, and desirable. To an optimist, of course, the glass is half full, while to a pessimist, the glass is half empty. Optimists and pessimists, in other words, will look at the very same situation or set of facts, but in completely different ways. Optimists are always going to view the world around them in a positive light, while the pessimists, rarely so. Stories told about 2 brothers. One was an incurable optimist, and the other an incorrigible pessimist. No matter what happened to the one child, his spirits could not be dampened. And no matter what happened to the other, his spirits could not be lifted up. And so one Christmas, their parents tried to correct these extreme attitudes. For the pessimist, they bought him Christmas gifts that anticipated his every wish, hoping that such an array of good things on Christmas morning would finally produce signs of a more sunny disposition. Conversely, they gave the optimistic child nothing but a bag of horse manure. Well, on Christmas morning, the pessimistic son first opened a box of magnificent electric trains. Instead of rejoicing, he said with dismay, "They'll probably break." And when he opened the box containing a brand new stereo, he simply groaned, "I don't have any CDs to play on this thing." And so it went, with gift after gift. He had nothing but negative responses. On the other hand, when the optimistic brother opened his bag and found that there was horse manure in it, he started jumping up and down for joy. And when his parents wanted to know what he was so happy about, he's saying, "Don't you see what I got? Don't you see what I got? There's just got to be a pony around here somewhere." Moreover, if wishful thinking is often completely unrealistic, optimism, on the other hand, is often grounded in what is possible, although not necessarily what is probable. A bag full of manure on Christmas morning certainly might signify that a pony was forthcoming, but it's definitely not a guarantee. Or as someone once observed, an optimist is a person who starts a new diet on Thanksgiving Day. Going back to Mike Foss for a moment, he observed that optimism ultimately depends on the strength of a person's spirit. Unlike wishful thinking, he says, optimism often sees the situation clearly and yet clings to the notion that good will triumph somehow. Now, hope is like optimism, Foss continues, in the sense of clinging confidently to the notion that the good will somehow triumph. But with optimism, that confidence again rests in the individual. and the strength of the individual spirit, whereas hope is founded in God and only in God. For the Christian, says Foss, hope is not dependent on the strength of our own spirit, but in fact functions precisely when our optimism fails, when our emotional and yes, even spiritual strength leaves us broken and vulnerable. And so summing up, on the one hand, hope is not wishful thinking, that is, as Eugene Peterson pointed out, projecting into the future simply what we want or think we need. Or as Mike Foss noted, the anticipation that something will occur even though no effort on our part has been expended. There's no logical reason, therefore, why it should happen. But neither is it optimism or simply a personal feeling that things will somehow turn out okay in the end. And so we return to our original question, what then is hope? As we've seen so far, hope, number one, grows out of faith, according to Eugene Peterson, and what God is doing, not what we're doing. Number two, as Mike Foss pointed out, hope does not mean that we actually know what's best for us and somehow have an idea, therefore, of what awaits us in the future. As someone once said, hope does not depend on having a blueprint for the future. Instead, hope involves living in anticipation of what God is going to do next, not what we ourselves expect to happen. And finally, number three, again, according to both Peterson and Foss, hope is founded in God, and only in God. It is to cling to the notion that good will ultimately triumph, not because of us, of course, or the strength of our own beliefs, but because of God. In fact, when we look a little further, we discover that the Greek word for hope is elpis. It comes from a root word which means to anticipate, and is therefore an expectation. Something stronger than a wish, obviously, and not just an optimistic belief either, that somehow things will turn out okay in the end. And the verb form of the word, the one that appears in our reading from Hebrews this morning, elpidzo, actually means to wait with full confidence. Again, not wishful thinking or mere optimism, but rather a sense of certainty. However, as John Boquist has pointed out, our normal use of the word hope is usually based on uncertainty, not certainty. He gives the following example. Suppose an engaged couple says, we have an outdoor wedding planned for Saturday. We sure hope it doesn't rain. In saying this, they're saying that the possibility of rain exists, but that their preference is for no rain. But as Boquist notes, when the New Testament uses the word hope, it is based on certainty. It's referring to something that's an absolute fact. It just hasn't occurred yet. Going back to that engaged couple, suppose it's Friday night and one of them were to say, I hope tomorrow is going to be Saturday. We find that a little strange, a little odd, wouldn't we? Of course tomorrow is going to be Saturday. It might rain, it might not. It could be cold, it could be hot, but no matter what, the day after Friday is going to be Saturday. And nothing can change that. It's precisely this kind of hope, this sense of hope that we find in the Bible, in the reading from Hebrews this morning. It refers to the anticipation, the expectation, the absolute certainty even that God is going to do what God has promised to do. Therefore, there is power, great power in hope. Mike Foss uses an incident from the life of Alexander Solzhenitsyn as a perfect example of what we're talking about here. Solzhenitsyn, as you may recall, was an acclaimed Russian novelist who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1970. Prior to that, however, following the Second World War and during the 1950s, he was a political prisoner in the Soviet Union. And Solzhenitsyn tells of a time when he was in the camps, when he was on the verge of giving up all hope. He was forced to work 12 hours a day on a starvation diet, and he became gravely ill. The doctors, in fact, were convinced he would die. One afternoon, while shoveling sand under a blazing sun, he simply stopped working. He stopped working even though he knew that the guards would beat him severely, even to death, perhaps. He just could not go on. At that point, he held no illusions that he was somehow assured of surviving. In fact, the exact opposite was probably true. He quite likely felt that he was going to die in the labor camps. No amount of wishful thinking was going to sustain him through this ordeal, nor was a sense of optimism going to carry the day and enable him to stay alive. And then he saw another prisoner, a fellow Christian, moving towards him cautiously. And with his cane, the man quickly drew a cross in the sand, and then just as quickly erased it so the guards would not see what he had just done. However, in that brief moment, Solzhenitsyn felt, as Mike Foss describes it, all the power of the gospel suddenly flow through his soul. It was a renewal of Christian hope. Even though the situation had not changed, even though the odds of his survival had not improved, even though there were no guarantees he would survive and the future would remain unknown. But it was this renewal of Christian hope that gave Solzhenitsyn the courage to endure the difficult day and all the days of imprisonment that followed. It was this renewal of Christian hope that enabled him to persevere in the most difficult of circumstances. It was this renewal of Christian hope that sustained his spirit, just as it has sustained the spirits of Christians in every difficult situation imaginable for 2,000 years now, still counting. There's a moment in the film The Shawshank Redemption when Andy Dufresne writes to his friend Red and says this: "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and good things never die." Hope, Christian hope, is not just a good thing. It's undoubtedly the very best of things. It's what we cling to when the trials and temptations of this life threaten to overwhelm us, when the pain and sadness of this life seem almost unbearable, when the challenges and difficulties of this life appear insurmountable. In those moments, moments of paralyzing doubt and despair, hope and only hope can sustain us. And not just any hope, but the hope we have in Christ Jesus. As Hebrews 6:19 reminds us, the verse upon which our congregation, Hope Lutheran Church, was founded, we have this hope, a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. Amen.